Good morning.
Good morning.
Come on, come on. Good morning.
Good morning.
Losers. We still here because we want to be lawyers?
Yes, sir.
To hear you. Are we still here because we want to be lawyers?
Yes, sir.
And again, you get everyone in this room risks failure, and there's no way around that. Talk to me.
Absolutely.
And you're preparing a case. So if you don't have the passion to prepare your case, why would you ever expect to succeed? I don't care what your GPA is. I don't care what your ethnicity is. I care, do you have the preparation? Why in God's name would I care about anything other than, if I was hiring you, why would I care about anything other than, do you have the passion to prepare, and are you reasonably bright? So, you know, everyone in this, well, unless God has other plans, every individual sitting in this room has the capacity to be a lawyer. No matter where you come from, no matter what your background is, unless God has other plans. And yet, I'm quite certain there are people in this room who will not become lawyers. And that will not almost certainly be attributed to God. It will be attributed to you just didn't have the passion to prepare. Right? So, and again, the thing here, I don't have the case name, but in terms of what it is to be a lawyer, a Supreme Court decision came down this week, and the whole bloody thing, it involved American Indians, and whether or not, I think it was the state of Washington could tax them, right? The whole bloody case comes down to what does the term in 1884, I think, what does the term mean when you write down, you have the right to trade freely? Now, I haven't read the case or anything. I would infer that to trade freely means to trade without obstruction, means have access to markets. But to trade freely could also mean to trade free of taxation. It could mean that, yes?
Yes.
Could the writers have meant when they wrote it in 1880 something? Forget whether you agree with it or not. I've mentioned nobody cares what you think. You with me? Could the writers, when that statute, the Act of Congress, when it was passed, could they have meant by to trade freely that given the vestiges of what Native Americans must have gone through at that time, could they have meant that they were free from taxation? Could they have meant that?
Yes.
But wouldn't it be better if they had meant that, if they had written that? Okay. So there are some parties out there, the state of Washington lost this case. Now, and again, just going to, what's a conservative justice, what's a non-conservative justice? Well, that vote was 5-4, and does in any way does that decision indicate a political preference? Or does it really go to how do these individuals read the law, and are they reading it as it was written at the time it was written? Because the conservatives split on this decision. Right. What I'm getting at is that is really what the LSAT's about. Can you, when you get, that's what they're testing. If they write the term freely, do you understand you have to interpret it the way the writer meant it, not the way you want it to be? Talk to me.
Yes.
And you get that that's going to carry over into law school, and that's going to carry over into law. So if I keep saying nobody cares what you think, I'm actually trying to say it for your own good. Nobody gives a flying fuck what you think, including me. All right, we don't care what the law says. So. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh ended up voting on opposite sides of that issue. And they came down saying that freely meant the state of Washington could not tax them, which, again, I don't have the history, certainly would not be where I would start from, but maybe I could end up there. All right. So today, have I mentioned you need a plan? And have you kind of got the sense that, you know, the implication of that, like, you got to have a plan. So what does that mean? The implication of that is in each of the 3 sections, you have to go in there and know exactly what you intend to accomplish. Yes? Talk to me.
Yes. Yes.
What you intend to accomplish has to be something you can accomplish. Yes?
Yes.
So you have to try the case you have, right? You're not going to try the perfect case. I'm not going to try the perfect case, right? You have to try the case that you can try, right? And then you're going to go into logical reasoning and you're going to have a plan. And the plan's going to have an outcome. It's going to have, and that's really what we're going to work on today, is we'll go over stuff, but think about how you're going to take the test as opposed to, you know, how many questions you can answer. You know what? It starts with this. What's your goal? What's your objective? Now, you really can't form your objective at this stage, right? Your objective will come when you've had an opportunity to prepare, right? Because you may say, well, my objective's a 170. But as you prepare, you may find realistically that's not going to be your objective, right? Your objective may be 155, but you've got to have an objective. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the objective, that's the big picture. That's overall. I'm trying to come away with X number right on this test. So to reach that objective, you have to have a plan for each section. So you're going to stop. You're not going to go home, open the book up, and take 35 minutes, you know, segment after segment after segment after segment. You're going to say, well, wait a minute. In order for me to achieve this objective, what do I have to achieve in each of the 3 different sections, right? There'll be 4 sections, but only 3 different sections. So that means within reading comprehension, within analytical reasoning, and within logical reasoning, you have to know what you're trying to accomplish before you take the test. Talk to me, come on.
Yes.
And if you can't get excited about it, I just don't understand how you'd ever want to be a lawyer. I mean, can you imagine, again, I'm just thinking, can you imagine if I had you in and we were going to try a case, and it was going to be any 2 of us, right? But we were going to try the case jointly, and you had no questions, and you showed little to no interest, and you just kind of looked like the whole damn thing was a chore. What are the chances you'd ever be successful? You wouldn't be. So, you know, again, have I mentioned this is a psychometric test? You know, you can be smart as a whip and not ever be a lawyer. You can almost be dumb as a board and be a lawyer. Almost, not quite. Okay, so this is what we're going to do today. What is that? So do you get what we touched on last week was in analytical, do you get that part of the plan to achieve the objective? Part of that plan is answering, 1, knowing what you can do. Am I doing 2 or 3 or 4 hypotheticals? Yes. And then, well, what's my plan to achieve that? So kind of like, maybe I have to look at all 4 first, right? Maybe I have to say, I need to set aside X amount of time, but you need to know exactly what that time is. Are you setting aside 2 minutes? Are you setting aside 4 minutes? How much time are you setting aside? Right? And then, are you making informed choices? Right? So, I want to touch that in analytical. I definitely want to touch that in reading comprehension. You've got to have a plan for reading comprehension. You know, it's got to say, okay, what realistically, again, you can start out with what would I like to score. That's fine. So you can say, well, I'd like to score 20. But if as you prepare, really the highest you're getting to is a 14, do you get that changes your objective? Talk to me. It's nothing personal. The goal is just to get into law school. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, let's get your ass into law school. So that's one of the things we'll cover today is, well, how do you do this in reading comprehension? You know, how do you decide what I can actually get? We'll talk about it, but in law school, it's read, comprehend, and extrapolate. 3 steps, not 2. So reading, everyone in this room can do. That's what I learned to do in the 1st grade with Spot. You know, Jane sees Spot. Paul sees Jane. That's great. You get that's reading. Okay. Understanding what you've read, that's comprehension. Do you get, that depends on who wrote what you're reading. Kabish, talk to me.
Yes.
So everyone's going to understand, insofar there's anything to understand, Spot sees Jane. But not everybody's going to understand maybe Aristotle. Well, they're still just words. You can't understand Aristotle and not understand the individual words. But you get, understanding is, the more gifted that writer, the greater the burden on the reader, yes? And you get on the LSAT, the writers are very gifted. So the burden on you just to understand what was written increases. That's step 2. But step 3 in law school is, there's no exam. There's no, you don't think like, and when I took, you know, whatever I took, if I took philosophy in college, my final exam is what was Edmund Burke's position? Oh, okay, and I could tell you that back then. I wasn't asked in college if Edmund Burke were alive today, and Edmund Burke was an English philosopher, nobody needs to know anything about Edmund Burke. But what I wasn't required to do in law school was to say, well, if Edmund Burke were alive today, what would his position likely be with respect to how property rights are treated under the U.S. Constitution? Because Edmund Burke didn't live during this time. Do you get that's the extrapolation, which requires you both to understand what Burke wrote, and Burke was a very bright man, and then to take that and apply it to a completely different scenario. Talk to me, do you see it?
Yes.
Well, that's law school. That's law. So, as you approach reading comprehension, that's what I want you to be thinking about. I don't want you to be thinking about, oh, this is boring. Yeah, it's boring. But again, and then that's relative, right? Jim, who teaches up at Albany, Jim reads the reading comprehension, and you have to sit him down. He gets so excited. You know, he went to Princeton. It's like, Jim, please, right? I read the reading comprehension and say, you know what? I really don't want to read this, but it's a piece of business. So you know what? I'm going to read it. So we want to cover how do you begin to make those choices in reading comprehension? Because if you make it doesn't matter. If you give yourself 35 minutes to do one passage, but you're incapable of really comprehending what the writer wrote, you're just not there, right? You get 35 minutes is probably not going to help. Talk to me. Right, which then means, you know, in reading comp, you're thinking about, well, what can my mind wrap itself around? And then that's the one I want to do, and you don't get a lot of time to make that decision. And again, within this section plan, you have to say, well, wait a minute, logical reasoning, the lower numbered questions are generally more approachable than the higher numbered questions. That's a valuable piece of information, but is that true in analytical? Is that true in reading comp? No, it's not. It's not. I mean, and we'll get into that, but you've got to be prepared. And then you have nothing to fear. You have nothing to fear. Because, I mean, if it's not meant to be, that's okay. That's okay. So that's the goal today, is to say, okay, let's take each of the 3 sections. We'll go back over, we'll cover the flaws and anything else you have. We'll break into assumptions. But there's a lot to cover. And it really focuses on this plan thing. And then we have some administrative stuff, but I'll handle that during a break. Anybody have any questions? Does that make sense? I didn't mean, did anybody have any questions?
Now, when you're doing a reading comprehension, when you're extrapolating, you're not bringing your own opinions, you're not bringing outside information, you're basing whatever decision, whatever choice and answer that you're making on what you're reading.
Correct. other words, what you're doing, right, is testing you, do you really understand what the writer's position is? Because you're being required, right, then to apply the writer's position to an entirely new hypothetical. Do you guys get that's law school? I mean, I don't know whether I'm telling you something you do know or something you don't know, and I guess you wouldn't know it. I mean, it's just I've known it for so long, you know, because I'm so old. You know, you say, everybody knows that. But do you get in law school, no one on the planet, unless they've really dumbed it down, I mean, I don't think they have, no one on the planet is asked to recite Justice Scalia's holding in Michigan versus EPA. I don't know, you know, hopefully you'll have to read that, but you get that when you're reading Michigan versus EPA, you're reading about the listing of carcinogenics. You're reading about how the statutorily things have to get listed. It's like you want to slit your wrists. And not for nothing, but whether or not you have a positive sense impression of Justice Scalia's positions or not, I don't care. He was he wrote in a very challenging way. So do you get the law school experiences, you have to understand how an egghead writes. You have to understand more specifically how the egghead writes about very technical, specific, and generally boring stuff, right? And then the final exam is never going to be, what did Justice Scalia say? Because we infer, since you want to be lawyers, right? We infer you know what he wrote, and therefore what he said. So we're not in college. It's based on what he wrote, and based on what, not based on what you wished he wrote, based on what he wrote. What are the implications for X, Y, and Z? Can you do that? I'm asking each of you, seriously, can you do that? Can you, forget Justice Scalia and Michigan versus EPA. Can you do that on the building of a wall? Can you do that? Can you do that? Can you put your own positions aside, read the governing law, and apply the governing law, not your fucking law, apply the governing law to the situation at hand, because if you can't, you're not going to be successful. Do you get it?
Yep. So I know you're not going to put your personal feelings, so I can, put that aside. But when you read Justice Scalia's position, isn't that asking you the way you interpret said law based on what that person said? Just like the other case in Washington, like two parties are arguing over how to interpret can't trade, what trading is and whatnot. One side said tax, the other side said no, it's not tax. So it's an interpretation of what people in Washington said like 100 or so years ago.
I'm not sure I can point, but I think what you're required to do is, I could have given you, in the Indian case, right? It was Gorsuch who went with the majority, and it was Kavanaugh who went with the minority. If in law school you were reading that case, and you were directed to read Gorsuch's majority opinion, then you are required to extrapolate what Gorsuch's majority opinion implies for something else. If you were required to read Kavanaugh's minority dissent instead, you would be required to apply the implications of Kavanaugh's dissent to that same situation. But nothing would have anything to do with Christopher. Do you understand that? You do not fucking exist. Yes, it's hugs, yeah. Right? But that's the discipline, right? Because the point at which you allow yourself to get in there, it corrupts the analysis. What are the implications of what this person, we're not asking you to agree with the person. What are the implications of that? So with Scalia, it would be, what were the implications that follow? Because you may argue that the majority opinion was not a healthy decision. Well, wouldn't a great way of showing that be to apply the principles Scalia cites in his majority opinion, apply them to a different situation, and say it's going to produce a terrible outcome? Wouldn't that be kind of a neat thing to do?
Yeah.
Well, that's what this business is. But first things first, it's understanding what was written, accepting, receiving what was written as it was written, and then saying, what are the implications of it? And if the implications are dire, well, then you're gonna point that out. Then we can revisit the original opinion. But you don't get to say, I want to save humanity, so we can't do this. Just say it. Yes, anything else? So we all know where I'm going tonight? Isn't it exciting? Can't you wait to get started?